So we are following King Asvapati in his descent into the night, deep into the world of falsehood. He wants to find the root of this falsehood. How has it crept into the blissful universe? How has all this darkness and evil come about? He wants to change that. He wants to bring about a divine life upon earth. So I will read about a page and a half, and then we'll go back and look at each sentence in more detail. Then the scene changed, but kept its dreadful core, altering its form. The life remained the same. A capital was there without a state. It had no ruler, only groups that strove. He saw a city of ancient ignorance, founded upon a soil that knew not light. There, each in his own darkness walked alone. Only they agreed to differ in evil's paths, to live in their own way for their own selves, or to enforce a common lie and wrong. Their ego was lord upon his peacock seat, and falsehood sat by him, his mate and queen. The world turned to them as heaven to truth and God. Injustice justified by firm decrees, the sovereign weights of errors legalized trade. But all the weights were false and none the same. Ever she watched with her balance and a sword, lest any sacrilegious word expose the sanctified formulas of her old misrule. In high professions wrapped, self-will walked wide, and license stalked, prating of order and right. There was no altar raised to liberty. True freedom was abhorred and hunted down. Harmony and tolerance nowhere could be seen. Each group proclaimed its dire and naked law. A frame of ethics knobbed with scriptural rules, or a theory passionately believed and praised. A table seemed of high heaven's sacred code. A formal practice, mailed and iron-shod, gave to a rude and ruthless warrior kind, drawn from the savage bowels of the earth, a proud, stern poise of harsh nobility, a civic posture rigid and formidable. But all their private acts belied the pose. Power and utility were their truth and right. An eagle rapacity clawed its coveted good. Beaks pecked and talons tore all weaker prey. In their sweet secrecy of pleasant sins, nature they obeyed, and not a moralist God. Inconscient traders in bundles of contraries, they did what in others they would persecute. When their eyes looked upon their fellow's vice, an indignation flamed, a virtuous wrath, oblivious of their own deep-hid offense. Mob-like, they stoned a neighbor caught in sin. A pragmatist judge within passed false decrees, posed worst iniquities on equity's base, reasoned ill actions just, sanctioned the scale of the merchant ego's interest and desire. Thus was a balance kept. The world could live. As zealot fervor pushed their ruthless cults, all faith not theirs bled, scourged as heresy. They questioned, captive, tortured, burned, or smote and forced the soul to abandon right or die. Amid her clashing creeds and warring sects, religion sat upon a blood-stained throne. 100 tyrannies oppressed and slew, and founded unity upon fraud and force. Only what seemed was prized as real there. I'm going to stop there. This is a really terrible picture of things that have happened in our world at different times and places in human history. But all this is happening in the world of falsehood, as Aswapati goes deeper and deeper to find the roots of this dreadful situation. Will you start, Dana, please?
Then the scene changed, but kept its dreadful course. Altering its form, the life remained the same. A capital was there, without a state. It had no ruler, only roots that strong. He saw a city of ancient ignorance, founded upon a soil that knew not light. There, each in his own darkness walked alone. Only they agreed to differ in evil's paths, to live in their own way for their own selves, or to enforce a common light and wrong. There, ego was lord upon his peacock seat, and falsehood sat by him, his mate and queen. The world turned to them as heaven to truth and God.
Thank you. So the outer appearances change, but that dreadful core, that essential center of falsehood and evil remains. The form is altered, but the life remained the same. So there's something like a capital city, but there isn't a state around it. And in that capital, there is no single ruler. There are only conflicting groups. Sri Aurobindo refers to this as a city of ancient ignorance that has been founded, that's based on a soil, a ground that knows nothing of light, the light of knowledge, the light of truth. So each individual who lives there, each in his own darkness, is walking alone. Only they agreed to differ in evil's paths. They don't conflict with each other too much, so long as the path is an evil one. So long as each of them can live in their own darkness, their own way, for their own selves. And sometimes they may band together to enforce, to impose a common lie and wrong. They may agree to work together to establish something like that. What rules there is the ego. Here's the Lord on his glorious, flaunting peacock seat. And next to him, as his queen, is falsehood, his mate and queen. So that world which Asvapati is seeing now turns to ego and falsehood as their rulers, just as heaven turns to truth and God spontaneously. In the same way, the beings there spontaneously turn to ego and to falsehood. Rita, would you read? It's the symbol of pride in this case. Proud as a peacock, we say.
Injustice justified by firm decrees, the sovereign weights of errors legalized trade, but all the weights were false and none the same. Ever she watched with her balance and her sword, lest any sacrilegious would expose the sanctified formulas of her old misrule.
Yes. So we have this traditional picture of justice, blindfold with her sword and her balances, which balances good and evil. Here he says injustice is the ruler. She justifies by firm decrees, gives commands. It has to be like this. And what she's watching over is a kind of marketplace. In the old marketplaces used to be kept samples of the different weights. So much for flour, so much for sugar, so much for so-and-so. Weights and measures. So here he's saying that these sovereign weights that are supposed to rule, to be prevailing in that world, they're the sovereign weights of errors, legalized trade, the currency that is valid in that country. But even there, all the weights were false. None of them were the same. So there's no real fair trade or justice of any kind. But nevertheless, that figure of injustice is always watching there with her balance and her sword to punish anyone who dares to expose that falsehood, lest any sacrilegious word expose the sanctified formulas of her old misrule. It has always been like this. It can't be changed. Sacrilegious, it means something that's against the religious rule. So nobody should say anything against this injustice because it's sanctified. It's been made holy by its old misrule. It's always been like that. It cannot be changed. Tara?
In high professions, worked, self-belief, walked wide, and license stopped preaching of order and right. There was no altar raised to liberty. True freedom was abhorred and hunted down. Harmony and tolerance nowhere could be seen. Each group proclaimed its dire and naked war.
Thank you. So self-will is what's really ruling there. But that self-will disguises itself, wraps itself up, dresses itself up in high professions, in statements saying how good and how right it is. That self-will walks wide, nobody can challenge it. And the other thing which is prevalent there is license, no rule. Everybody can do just what they want. But that license also dresses itself up. It walks around prating. That means using empty words about order and right. But there's no altar to liberty, to freedom. True freedom is abhorred, hated, dreaded, hunted down. Harmony and tolerance, when you deal generously with your fellow human beings, tolerance, those things nowhere could be seen. Each of those groups, he says there are several groups, no? striving between them, competing groups. Each group proclaims its own dire and naked law, its terrible law, dreadful law.
So, what does it mean?
Sorry?
Naked law.
Hmm?
What does it mean that it says naked law?
They don't even try to dress it up. It's just our law. That's the way we do it. Then it doesn't need to be any justification. And dire means dreadful, frightful. Is it clear? Yeah. Will you read?
A frame of ethics, not its scriptural rules, or a theory passionately believed and praised, a table seemed of high heaven's sacred code, a formal practice nailed and iron sharp. Gave to a rude and ruthless warrior kind, drawn from the savage
Bowels.
of the earth, a proud, stern poise of harsh nobility, a civic posture rigid and formidable.
So this is, each group has its own law, and they do have some kind of justification of it, a frame of ethics, a framework. Ethics, of course, is right behavior, the behavior that we feel to be good and correct. So they have something like that, a frame of ethics, and it's even, this frame is decorated with very complex carvings representing scriptural rules which must not be broken. So like that, a frame of ethics which is proclaimed, or one person's theory, a theory that's passionately believed in and praised. These things are made to seem like a table, a tablet of divine law, a table seemed of high heaven's sacred code. These are all just the conventions or the creations of the beings in that world, but they are given this high appearance of divine and inviolable law. And then there's a description of the kind of beings who are ruling there, a warrior, ruthless warrior kind. They have their own way of practice, their own code of conduct. It's a formal practice, mailed, he says. It means that the armor, wearing very strong armor and iron shod, so armored right from the head to the feet. This ruthless, rude and ruthless warrior kind, they seem to have been drawn out of the very bowels of the earth, from the darkest, deepest underground spaces. But it gives to these warriors the appearance, a proud, stern poise of harsh nobility. A civic posture, rigid and formidable. They give the appearance of having a very high kind of stern morality. Janaka, would you read, please?
But ordained private acts believed the post. Power and utility were their truth and right, and eager rapacity clothed its coat good. Beaks pecked and tongues tore all waker prey. In their sweet secrecy of the pleasant scenes, nature they obey, and not a moralist God.
Thank you. Yes.
Difficult to read this.
It's very difficult to read and study this. I think the last time we were reading, we somehow skipped through these pages. But anyway, this time we'll really try and follow each step of the way that King Asvapati takes.
I have a question.
Yes.
Do you know what Asvapati did to keep his sanity when he passed through this world?
Yes, I think we are told what he did, but it comes a little later. Now he's just observing all this, no? As we can perhaps observe historical examples of societies like this that have existed in different parts of the world in different historical times.
But it still exists today.
Of course, these things are still in human nature, so they are still happening, yes. Sometimes they flare up into our human world in more or less obvious forms. So there's this pretense of a high warrior, noble creed, no? All their private acts contradict this pose of noble morality. No? Power and utility were their truth and right. That's the only things they care about. And then he compares them to birds of prey. An eagle rapacity. Rapacity is greed. Like greedy eagles, they're tearing with their talons whatever they wanted to get hold of, whatever their coveted good, what they desire to have. So, like eagles, their beaks pecked and their talons tore all prey, all smaller, weaker creatures. No? And privately, they keep their sweet secrecy of pleasant sins. They obey their nature. They don't follow any higher moral code. Sorry, would you go on from there, please?
Inconscient traders in bundles of contraries, they did what the others they would persecute. When their eyes looked upon their fellows' vice, and indignation flamed, the virtuous wrath, oblivious of their own deep offense, mob-like they stoned the neighbor called their sin. The pragmatist judge within past false decrees, proposed worst iniquities of equity's place. Reason ill actions just, sanctioned the scale of the merchant egoist interest and desire.
This one, next line, please.
Thus was the balance kept, the world could live.
Yes, this is the way they keep things going. They did what in others they would persecute. And then they're so self-righteous when their eyes look upon their fellow's vice, an indignation flamed, a virtuous wrath. And then they forget all about their own wrongdoings. They're ready to stone to death a neighbor that they've caught in sin. So, All of us perhaps have a kind of judge within who tells us what to do or assesses the rightness and wrongness of what we do. But what they have is this pragmatist judge. He just judges according to his own wishes and desires. He passes false decrees and is able to base even the worst iniquities, the wickedest and most unjust things on a base of pretended justice, equity. That pragmatist judge uses the reason to justify wrong, ill actions, and gives a sanction, says yes to this dishonest scale, this balance which the merchant ego is using to satisfy its own interest and desire. So in this way, they keep their world going. Thus was a balance kept. The world could live. Prema.
Here Sigmund Hermann pushed their ruthless cause, all fate not theirs, blood scorched as heresy. They questioned, captive, tortured, burned or smoked, and forced the soul to abandon right or die, amid her clashing creeds and warring sects. Religion sat upon a blood-stained throne, 100
tyrannies
oppressed and sleep, and founded unity upon
fraud.
And force.
Fraud is cheating. Yes. So zealots, people who are very, very enthusiastic about their religion, a zealot fervor, enthusiastic energy is pushing their ruthless cults, their religious practices, which are absolutely merciless. Each of those groups has its own faith, but all the other faiths they will punish dreadfully, scourged as heresy, as untruth. So they will catch hold of anybody who doesn't follow their particular cult. They will catch them, question them, make them captives, torture them, burn them at the stake, to force the soul to abandon right or die. And amidst all these clashing creeds and warring sects, each of them with their own particular type of religion, it's as if religion, the figure of religion, is sitting on a blood-stained throne. Through too much of human history, it has been like this. And it's not just one tyranny, not just one unjust, powerful ruler. There are 100 tyrannies, oppressing, killing, trying to enforce unity with fraud, with cheating, and with violence. And based any appearance of unity upon fraud and force. Will you read, dear? Yeah.
Only what seemed was praised as real there. The ideal was a cynic, ridiculous, but put by the crowd way. Spiritual seeking, wandering, outcasting. A dreamer's self-deceiving drift of thought. A mad
Chimera.
chimera deemed on Hippocrates' fate. It fascinates instinct, tried through mind obscure, lot in the circuits of the ignorance. A light was the truth, and truth a lie.
Yes. Only what seemed was prized as real there, only appearances. The ideal, like high ideals such as we are encouraged to live up to, is ridiculed. People laugh at it. How can you be so stupid as to believe in anything like that? Hooted by the crowd. It means like a crowd of people surrounding somebody who is defending the ideal and laughing at them. Mocked by enlightened wits, the people who consider themselves so well educated and clever, they ridicule people who have ideals. So spiritual seeking is wandering, lost, like an outcast, an exile. Those enlightened wits think that spiritual seeking is just a dreamer's self-deceiving web of thought, an illusion, a delusion, or a mad chimera. We have had this word chimera before, no? An impossible animal, an impossible existence. A mad chimera deemed. Or a hypocrite's fake. It's just something that you're faking. You don't really believe it and live it. That passionate instinct which is there in the human soul for spiritual seeking is just trailing somehow through obscure minds that are lost in the circuits, the mazes, the labyrinths of the ignorance. In that world, a lie was there, the truth, and truth, a lie. So now we will come to the answer to Rita's question. Lela.
Here must the traveler of their whole way, for daring hell's kingdoms wins the heavenly road, pause or pass slowly through that perilous space, a prayer upon his lips and the great name, if road not all discernment's keen spear point. He might stumble into falsity's endless net. Over his shoulders often he must look back, like one who feels on his neck an enemy's breath. Else, stealing up behind the prisoner's blow, might prostrate, cast, and pin to unholy soil, pierced through his back by evil's poignant stake. So might one fall on the eternal's road, forfeiting the spirit's lonely chance in time, and no news of him reached the waiting gods, marked missing in the register of souls. His name, the index of the fading hope, the position of the dead remembered star.
such poignant lines. No? The traveler on the upward way has to be so careful, because when we're on the upward way and following the instinct of spiritual search, we have to pass nearby the kingdoms of hell. For daring hell's kingdoms winds the heavenly route. We have to pass near to these dangers. But we must do it very, very carefully. We must pause or pass slowly through that perilous space, a prayer upon our lips, remembering always the great name. If we don't look carefully at everything, if probed not all discernment's keen spear point, that's our weapon, discernment of the truth, being able to distinguish what is true and false. We might fall, stumble into the endless net of falsity. So the pilgrim of the upward way must often look back over our shoulders, like one who's feeling an enemy's breath on our neck, because we may get struck from behind, stealing up behind. A treasonous blow, a treacherous blow might just throw us flat and pin us to that unholy soil, pierced through the back by evil's poignant stake. In this way, it's possible to fall on that road towards the eternal. And then you lose, forfeiting the Spirit's lonely chance in time. Each of our lives is an opportunity, but we may, if we get caught in that net of falsehood, we may lose that chance. And then it's as if our name gets forgotten. No news of him reach the waiting gods, or his name gets marked missing in the register of souls. Then it's an indication of a failing hope, marking the position of a dead, remembered star.
But this is also scary.
This is very, very scary. This is super scary. Yeah. Yeah.
And this is not our fault, no? We do not know.
We can only rely on the great name.
Shraddhavan, I tell you something just before when I came to read Savitri together. I opened Agenda 31 December 1963, and I discovered the descent into the night about sardonic rictus.
Yes, yes.
And Mother described, she tell only joy, pétillement of joy change the falsehood. Also when you have ardent prayer, devotion, this never. The falsehood stay back you and never change. Only joy change falsehood.
That is, we have this wonderful drawing of the mothers. Sorrow, what does she say? Falsehood is the sorrow of the Lord, and only divine joy can save us. But how to keep, no? So would you like to read the next lines, Ganga Lakshmi?
Only we're safe who keep God in their hearts. Courage, their armor, faith, their sword, they must walk. The hand ready to
Smite.
The eyes
To scout.
Casting the javelin regarding front, arrows and soldiers of army of flight. Hardly even so the grisly danger pass, release into a calmer, purer air. They dare at length to breathe and smile once more. Once more they move beneath the real sun. Who here claim rule, the spirit still have power.
Yes, thank you. So it's a region like that, where only were safe those who kept God in their hearts and who armed themselves with courage and faith. They must walk, but they must be very alert. The hand ready to smite, the eye to scout. We can't take things easy. I remember Amal Kiran telling me how once, just on the corner of the street opposite the ashram gate, suddenly one day a great blackness fell on him. And when he told Mother about it, she said, "Yes, you're on a battlefield. You have to be careful. You can't just take things for granted. You have to be alert." So it is like that. If we come into this battlefield of good and evil, the only way to keep safe is to keep the divine always in the heart, courage, faith, and readiness to be alert. Casting a javelin regard in front. A javelin is a kind of spear for throwing. So at least you can keep your alertness. These are the heroes and soldiers of the army of light. But even so, it's difficult even for them. Hardly even so. That grisly danger past when they come out of the very difficult danger zone and are released into a calmer, purer air. People who have passed through that hardly dare to breathe at last and feel free, smile once more. But they do feel a sense of relief. Once more they move beneath a real sun, not a sun of falsehood and delusion. It may seem, we may have times in our lives, experiences, when we feel that hell is ruling, but the Spirit still has power. Joel, would you read the last lines?
This no man's land he passed without debate. Him the heights mission, him the abyss desired. None stood across his way, no voice forbade. For swift and easy is the downward path, and now towards the night was turned his face.
Yes. So this is Aswapati's experience. Nobody's trying to stop him. He's not on the upward path now. He's on the downward path. So this no man's land that he passed without debate. Nobody tries to stop him or prevent him. The higher levels of consciousness have sent him on this task. and the abyss, the deep, dark emptiness is just waiting for him to come. Nobody stops him, tries to stop him. Nobody tries to tell him not to go, because that downward path is very swift and easy, and his face is turned towards the night. He's descending, deliberately, consciously descending into the night. So it actually gets worse. We'll go on next week. Difficult reading, as you said, Janaka. Nevertheless, thanks to Sri Aurobindo.
Then the scene changed, but kept its dreadful core. Altering its form, the life remained the same. A capital was there without a state. It had no ruler, only groups that strove. He saw a city of ancient ignorance, founded upon a soil that knew not light. There, each in his own darkness walked alone. Only they agreed to differ in evil's paths, to live in their own way for their own selves, or to enforce a common lie and wrong. There, ego was lord upon his peacock seat, and falsehood sat by him, his mate and queen. The world turned to them as heaven to truth and God. Injustice justified by firm decrees the sovereign weights of error's legalized trade. But all the weights were false, and none the same. Ever she watched with her balance and a sword, lest any sacrilegious word expose the sanctified formulas of her old misrule. In high professions wrapped, self-will walked wide, and license stalked, prating of order and right. There was no altar raised to liberty. True freedom was abhorred and hunted down. Harmony and tolerance nowhere could be seen. Each group proclaimed its dire and naked law. A frame of ethics knobbed with scriptural rules, or a theory passionately believed and praised, a table seemed of high heaven's sacred gold. A formal practice, mailed and iron-shod, gave to a rude and ruthless warrior kind, drawn from the savage bowels of the earth, a proud, stern poise of harsh nobility, a civic posture rigid and formidable. But all their private acts belied the pose. Power and utility were their truth and right. An eagle rapacity clawed its coveted good. Beaks pecked and talons tore all weaker prey. In their sweet secrecy of pleasant sins, nature they obeyed, and not a moralist God. Inconscient traders, in bundles of contraries, they did what in others they would persecute. When their eyes looked upon their fellows' vice, an indignation flamed, a virtuous wrath. Oblivious of their own deep-hid offence, mob-like they stoned a neighbour caught in sin. A pragmatist judge within passed false decrees, posed worst iniquities on equities base, reasoned ill actions just, sanctioned the scale of the merchant ego's interest and desire. Thus was a balance kept, the world could live. A zealot fervour pushed their ruthless cults. All faith not theirs bled scourged as heresy. They questioned, captive, tortured, burned or smote, and forced the soul to abandon right or die. Amid her clashing creeds and warring sects, religion sat upon a blood-stained throne. 100 tyrannies oppressed and slew, and founded unity upon fraud and force. Only what seemed was prized as real there. The ideal was a cynic ridicule's butt, hooted by the crowd, mocked by enlightened wits. Spiritual seeking wandered, outcasted. A dreamer's self-deceiving web of thought, or mad chimera deemed, or hypocrite's fake. Its passionate instinct trailed through minds obscure, lost in the circuits of the ignorance. A lie was there the truth, and truth a lie. Here must the traveller of the upward way, for daring hell's kingdoms winds the heavenly route, pause or pass slowly through that perilous space, a prayer upon his lips, and the great name. If probed not all discernment's keen spear point, he might stumble into falsity's endless net. Over his shoulder often he must look back, like one who feels on his neck an enemy's breath. Else, stealing up behind, a treasonous blow might prostrate cast and pin to unholy soil, pierced through his back by evil's poignant stake. So might one fall on the Eternal's road, forfeiting the spirit's lonely chance in time, and no news of him reach the waiting gods. Marked missing in the register of souls, his name the index of a failing hope, the position of a dead, remembered star. Only were safe who kept God in their hearts. Courage their armour, faith their sword, they must walk, the hand ready to smite, the eye to scout, casting a javelin regard in front. Heroes and soldiers of the army of light. Hardly even so the grisly danger past, released into a calmer, purer air, they dared at length to breathe and smile once more. Once more they moved beneath a real sun. Though hell claimed rule, the spirit still had power. This no man's land he passed without debate. Him the heights missioned, him the abyss desired. None stood across his way, no voice forbade, for swift and easy is the downward path, and now towards the night was turned his face.